In a Seattle tech tower, a brilliant daughter was about to destroy her father's empire with keystrokes instead of explosives. What started as a family confession took a shocking turn when they came face to face with brutal rejection. Anaiah Williams wasn't your typical corporate heir. For 6 years, she had architected Chen Electronics' revolutionary technology, known for building the smart home systems that would make billions. When her father declared, "You're dead to me," after she came out as transgender, she had no idea she was about to wage digital war. Anaiah's systematic revenge would lead to the company's complete destruction. What began as seeking acceptance became corporate annihilation. The Chen legacy would never survive the dead daughter's resurrection. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Anaiah Williams' hands trembled as she stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of her father's corner office, the Seattle skyline stretching endlessly beyond the glass. The Space Needle pierced the gray October sky like a steel prayer. And somewhere in the distance, Elliott Bay glittered with the cold promise of rain. She'd rehearsed this moment 1,000 times, but now, watching Richard Chen review the IPO documents that bore her innovations, the words felt like stones in her throat. "The smart home integration protocols are brilliant," Richard said, his voice carrying the same pride she'd heard since childhood whenever he discussed her work. "Investors are calling it revolutionary. The way you've connected IoT devices with predictive AI, Anaiah, this will make Chen Electronics a household name." The irony wasn't lost on her. She was about to destroy everything he valued most, and he was praising her for it. Richard looked up from the documents, his weathered face softening with genuine affection. At 62, he still carried himself with the authority of someone who'd built an empire from nothing, but when he looked at his eldest child, there was something almost vulnerable in his expression. "Your grandfather would be so proud. 3 generations of Chen innovation, and you've given us the key to the future." Anaiah turned from the window, her reflection ghosting across the glass like a warning. "Dad, there's something I need to tell you. Can it wait? The board meeting starts in an hour, and I want to review the market projections one more time." Richard's attention was already drifting back to the papers, his mind calculating profit margins and market penetration. "No." The word came out sharper than she intended. "It can't wait." Something in her tone made Richard set down his reading glasses. For the first time since she'd entered his office, he was fully present, his dark eyes studying her face, with the same intensity he brought to business negotiations. Anaiah had spent 28 years earning that look, first as the daughter who could fix any computer problem, then as the MIT graduate who'd chosen to stay and build the family business rather than chase Silicon Valley dreams. She'd been the golden child, the heir apparent, the one who understood that Chen Electronics wasn't just a company, but a legacy written in circuit boards and code. "I'm transgender, Dad." The words hung in the air between them like a bridge burning. Richard's expression didn't change immediately. He was too controlled for that. But Maya watched something shift behind his eyes. A calculation. A reassessment. "What does that mean?" His voice was carefully neutral, the tone he used with difficult clients. "It means I'm a woman. It means I've known since I was a child, and I've been hiding it because I was afraid of losing everything." Maya's voice grew stronger with each word. "It means I'm going to transition. Legally, medically, completely." Richard stood slowly, moving to the window where Maya had been standing moments before. The Seattle skyline reflected in his glasses, making his expression unreadable. "This is about that friend of yours, Jordan Park. They've influenced you. This isn't about Jordan. This isn't about anyone influencing me. This is about who I am." "Who you think you are?" Richard's voice carried the patient correction of someone explaining a simple mistake. "Anaiah, you've been under tremendous pressure with the IPO preparation. Sometimes stress can make us question fundamental things about ourselves." The dismissal hit her like a physical blow. She'd expected anger, disappointment, even rejection, but not this casual erasure of her identity. "Dad, I'm not confused. I'm not stressed. I'm your daughter." Richard turned from the window, and for the first time, Maya saw the man who'd negotiated hostile takeovers and crushed competitors. "My son," he said, his voice carrying absolute finality, "is having some kind of breakdown. But we'll get through this. We'll find you the best therapists, the right medication. I don't need to be fixed." Maya's voice rose despite her attempt to stay calm. "I need you to see me. Really see me. I see someone throwing away everything we've built. I see someone destroying the Chen name for what? A fantasy? A delusion?" The words hit her like shards of glass. This was the man who'd taught her to code, who'd celebrated every achievement, who'd once told her she was the smartest person he knew. Now he was looking at her like she was a stranger. "The technology in those documents," Anaiah said, her voice steady despite the chaos in her chest. "The AI protocols, the integration systems. I built all of that. Me. Your daughter. My son built those systems. The boy I raised, the heir I trained. Not." Richard gestured vaguely as if Maya's identity was something distasteful he couldn't name. "Then you don't know your son at all." Anaiah moved toward the desk, her hand reaching for her laptop bag. "Because your son was never real. He was a performance. A lie we both needed to believe." Richard's face went white. "If you walk out that door, if you pursue this madness, you are no longer part of this family. No longer part of this company." Anaiah's hand stilled on her laptop case. "Dad, please. I'm still me. I'm still the person who... You're dead to me." The words hit the air with the finality of a gavel. Richard's voice never wavered, never showed a crack of uncertainty. He might have been reading quarterly projections for all the emotion he displayed. Anaiah felt something inside her chest crystallize into something harder than diamond and twice as sharp. The daughter who'd walked into this office was gone, and what remained was someone who understood exactly how little her father's love had actually meant. Fine. She shouldered her laptop bag, the weight of it suddenly feeling like armor. "But those innovations you're so proud of? The technology that's going to make Chen Electronics a household name? I built every line of code. I designed every protocol. And I documented every security vulnerability." Richard's composure cracked slightly. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you just disowned the only person who knows how fragile your empire really is." Anaiah moved toward the door, her steps steady despite the earthquake happening inside her chest. "Enjoy your IPO, Dad? I hope it's everything you dreamed it would be." She paused at the door, her hand on the handle. "And when you're standing in front of those investors, remember that everything they're buying was built by your dead daughter." The elevator ride down felt like descending into hell. Anaiah watched the floors tick by executive suites, engineering labs, the marketing department where Alex worked in social responsibility. Each floor represented years of her life, dreams she'd built with her own hands, a future that had just been ripped away because she dared to exist as herself. The lobby buzzed with the usual afternoon energy. Employees moved purposefully between meetings. Visitors waited in designer chairs, and the Chen Electronics logo gleamed on the wall like a promise of innovation and progress. Anaiah had helped design that logo, had been consulted on the lobby renovation, had been part of every major decision that shaped this place. Now she was walking through it for the last time. Security didn't stop her. Why would they? As far as anyone knew, she was still Richard Chen's eldest child, still the heir apparent, still the golden girl who'd brought the company into the 21st century. They had no idea that the person walking past them had just been erased from existence. Outside, the Seattle drizzle had started, turning the afternoon gray and soft. Anaiah pulled her jacket tighter and looked back at the Chen Electronics building, its glass facade reflecting the cloudy sky like a mirror. Somewhere in that tower, Richard was probably already on the phone with his lawyer, making sure she couldn't access company systems, couldn't claim credit for her work, couldn't threaten the IPO he'd spent years planning. He thought he'd won. He thought he'd cleanly severed the problem, protected his legacy, saved his reputation. He had no idea what he'd just unleashed. Anaiah pulled out her phone and scrolled to Jordan's number. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment before she typed, "It's done." He chose the company. Jordan's response came immediately. "I'm so sorry. Are you okay?" Anaiah looked up at the building again, her eyes finding the corner office, where her father was probably already moving forward, as if she'd never existed. The daughter he'd loved was dead. The son he'd thought he knew had never been real. But the brilliant mind that had built his empire's future? That was very much alive. And it was very, very angry. "I will be," she typed back, her thumb moving with steady precision. "Give me 6 months." 6 months later, Anaiah's fingers moved across 3 keyboards simultaneously, the glow from multiple monitors painting her Capitol Hill apartment in blues and whites. The space was sparse: a futon, a coffee table buried under energy drink cans, and walls lined with servers humming their electronic lullabies. This wasn't the penthouse life she'd known as Richard Chen's heir apparent. This was something rawer, something real. The morning news droned from a muted television in the corner, but Anaiah's attention was locked on the financial feeds, scrolling across her center screen. Chen Electronics stock had climbed steadily over the past month, buoyed by early whispers of the IPO announcement. Her father's face appeared briefly in a CNBC interview, discussing, quote, revolutionary smart home innovations that would transform the industry. Her innovations, her code, her architecture. The coffee had gone cold hours ago, but Anaiah barely noticed. She'd been tracking Chen Electronics' digital footprint since dawn, mapping the company's network topology with the patience of someone who had helped build it. Every server, every security protocol, every backup system. She knew them all intimately. What Richard didn't know was that she'd left herself breadcrumbs. Digital pathways that only she could navigate. Her phone buzzed. Jordan Park's name lit up the screen. "Please tell me you've been sleeping." Jordan's voice carried the kind of exhaustion that came from genuine worry. Sleep is for people who aren't documenting corporate vulnerabilities. Anaiah stretched, her spine protesting after hours hunched over her workstation. "How's the real world treating you?" "Better than your dungeon is treating you, apparently. When's the last time you left that apartment?" Anaiah glanced toward the window, where Seattle's gray morning light filtered through blinds she couldn't remember opening. "Yesterday. Maybe Tuesday." "Anaiah." Jordan's voice carried the weight of friendship earned through late-night transition support groups and countless conversations about identity, family, and survival. "I'm worried about you." "Don't be. I'm exactly where I need to be. Plotting revenge against your father isn't healing, it's justice." Anaiah's voice carried an edge that made Jordan pause. "He built his IPO on my work, Jordan. He's about to become even richer selling technology I created, while telling the world his brilliant son designed it all. His dead son, according to him." The words hit like ice water. Anaiah's fingers stilled on the keyboard. She'd heard through Alex, poor Alex, caught in the middle, that Richard had indeed rewritten history. The official company narrative now credited the smart home innovations to the Chen family legacy and, quote, collaborative engineering excellence. Her name had been scrubbed from patents, presentations, and press releases as thoroughly as if she'd never existed. Then maybe it's time his dead son had some final words. Across town, in the Chen Electronics boardroom, Richard reviewed the IPO timeline with his executive team. The mahogany table gleamed under recessed lighting, and the Seattle skyline provided a backdrop of success and ambition. Everything was proceeding according to plan. Market analysts are calling the smart home integration the most significant innovation in consumer electronics this decade, announced Sarah Martinez, the chief marketing officer. Early investor interest is exceeding all projections. Richard nodded, his expression carefully controlled. Security assessment? Complete overhaul 6 months ago, reported James Walsh, the new head of IT security. Previous vulnerabilities have been addressed. The system is fortress-level secure. What James didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the previous vulnerabilities had been documented by someone who understood the system better than its new guardians ever could. Someone who had designed elegant backdoors that looked like features, hidden administrative pathways that resembled standard protocols. Someone who was very much alive, despite being officially dead. "Alex, you've been quiet," Richard said, his attention turning to his remaining child. "Social responsibility assessment?" Alex Chen looked up from his tablet, his expression carefully neutral. At 25, he'd inherited his father's sharp intelligence, but none of his ruthless certainty. "The employee transition programs are in place. The IPO will fund expanded benefits and job security initiatives." Richard smiled. Alex was everything he'd hoped for in a son. Stable, predictable, committed to the family legacy. Not like... He pushed the thought away. There was no point dwelling on mistakes. The company was stronger now, focused, unified, under clear leadership. The IPO would cement Chen Electronics' position as an industry leader, and the Chen name would endure for generations. What Richard didn't see was the flash of guilt that crossed Alex's face. What he couldn't know was that Alex had been researching Anaiah's new address, her new life, the sister he missed desperately, but couldn't contact without betraying their father. What none of them suspected was that 20 blocks away, in a cluttered apartment filled with humming servers, Anaiah had just discovered something that changed everything. Chen Electronics wasn't just planning an IPO, they were announcing it tomorrow. A surprise revelation designed to maximize market impact and media attention. Richard's gamble to create a feeding frenzy among investors. Anaiah leaned back in her chair, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Her father thought he was so clever, keeping the announcement secret until the last possible moment. He had no idea that his dead daughter was about to crash his party, and she had front-row seats to the collapse. The Fairmont Olympic Hotel's grand ballroom buzzed with anticipation. 200 of Seattle's most powerful investors, tech journalists, and industry analysts filled the elegant space, their conversations creating a symphony of ambition and opportunity. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables draped in Chen Electronics' signature blue, and massive screens displayed the company logo against a backdrop of innovation metrics. Anaiah sat in Victrola Coffee across the street, her laptop positioned perfectly to observe the hotel's entrance through the floor-to-ceiling windows. She'd arrived 2 hours early, claiming a corner table with clear sightlines and reliable Wi-Fi. To any observer, she looked like another Seattle tech worker catching up on emails over artisanal coffee. They had no idea she was about to orchestrate the most sophisticated corporate sabotage in the city's history. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard's voice carried across the ballroom as he took the podium. Even from her distant perch, Anaiah could see him through the hotel's windows, confident, commanding, completely unaware that his every word was being monitored by the daughter he'd declared dead. Today marks a watershed moment for Chen Electronics and the future of connected living. Anaiah's fingers moved across her keyboard with surgical precision. The first phase was elegant in its simplicity, a cascading series of authentication errors that would make the company's systems appear unreliable exactly when they needed to perform flawlessly. Our revolutionary smart home integration platform represents 3 generations of Chen innovation. The first screen went dark. It happened so subtly that most of the audience didn't notice immediately. The presentation display flickered, showing a brief error message before cutting to black. Richard paused mid-sentence, his practiced composure showing the first hairline crack. "Technical difficulties," he announced with a forced smile. "These things happen with cutting-edge technology." The second phase targeted the demonstration units. Anaiah had spent weeks mapping the smart home devices scattered throughout the ballroom. Thermostats, lighting controllers, security cameras, all designed to showcase Chen Electronics' seamless integration capabilities. Instead, they began to malfunction in perfect sequence. The room's temperature spiked suddenly, causing uncomfortable murmurs from the audience. Emergency lighting strobed intermittently, creating an almost carnival atmosphere. The sound system emitted a low, persistent hum that made conversation difficult. "Perhaps we could continue without the demonstrations," suggested Margaret Thorne, the lead investor from Cascade Ventures, her voice carrying polite concern that barely masked growing alarm. Richard's jaw tightened. Of course, the core technology speaks for itself, but the core technology was no longer speaking at all. Anaiah's third phase was her masterpiece, a systematic corruption of the financial data that formed the backbone of Richard's presentation. Stock projections became gibberish. Market analysis charts displayed impossible numbers. Revenue forecasts showed the company somehow losing negative money, creating mathematical paradoxes that hurt to contemplate. "There seems to be some issue with our data feeds," Richard announced, sweat beginning to glisten on his forehead despite the room's erratic temperature. From her coffee shop, Anaiah watched her father's carefully constructed empire crumble in real time. Every system failure was precise, targeted, designed to showcase exactly how vulnerable Chen Electronics really was. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was demonstrating the very security flaws she'd tried to warn him about months ago. The investors were no longer politely concerned. Phone calls were being made. Whispered conversations grew more urgent. Several attendees had already begun gathering their materials, the universal signal of a presentation gone catastrophically wrong. Preparing and narrating the story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Detective Sarah Kim, who'd been attending as part of an ongoing investigation into corporate cybersecurity, noticed patterns in the failures that made her instincts prickle. This wasn't random technical difficulty. This was surgical precision. Someone with intimate knowledge of Chen Electronics systems was orchestrating a symphony of destruction. She began taking notes, her trained eye cataloging the sophistication required for such an attack. This wasn't the work of external hackers or foreign agents. This was personal. "I think we should reschedule," Richard finally admitted, his voice carrying none of its earlier confidence. The great Richard Chen, who'd built an empire through sheer force of will, was retreating in front of the very people whose money he needed most. As investors filed out of the ballroom, some sympathetic, others openly skeptical, Anaiah felt the intoxicating rush of successful revenge. For 6 months, she'd lived with the memory of her father's voice declaring her dead. Now she'd return the favor, publicly executing his dreams with the same cold efficiency he'd shown her. But as she watched Richard's shoulders sag under the weight of public humiliation, something unexpected twisted in her chest. This wasn't satisfaction. It was emptiness. The hollow victory tasted like ashes. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jordan. "Saw the news about Chen Electronics. Whatever you did, I hope it was worth it." Anaiah stared at the message, then looked back at the hotel where her father was probably fielding angry calls from investors and board members. The man who'd built everything from nothing was watching it crumble, and she was the architect of his death. The hollow victory of the IPO disaster had lasted exactly 12 hours before Anaiah realized she was just getting started. Richard's humiliation felt like an appetizer, when what she really craved was a 7-course meal of destruction. If he wanted to erase her from existence, she'd show him what that actually looked like, by erasing everything he'd built. Her apartment had transformed into a war room. 3 additional monitors displayed real-time feeds from Chen Electronics' internal systems, their glow painting her face in stark blues and whites. Empty takeout containers formed archaeological layers on every surface, marking the passage of 72 sleepless hours spent crafting her escalation. The second wave began at 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday, when Chen Electronics' supply chain management system experienced what appeared to be a cascading failure. Orders for critical components were mysteriously canceled. Shipping manifests became corrupted. Vendor payment systems began rejecting legitimate transactions, while approving phantom purchases that led nowhere. By morning, Richard was fielding frantic calls from suppliers across 3 time zones. "Mr. Chen, our payment for the Q4 processor shipment was rejected again," reported Janet Liu from Pacific Components, her voice tight with professional concern. "This is the 3rd time this month. Our CFO is asking questions." Richard pressed his phone tighter to his ear, pacing behind his desk, while the Seattle morning light struggled through the gray clouds. "Janet, I assure you this is a temporary glitch. Our new IT security protocols are more stringent than before." What he didn't say was that the glitch was costing Chen Electronics millions in delayed shipments and damaged vendor relationships. What he couldn't know was that the daughter he'd declared dead was systematically unraveling every business partnership he'd spent decades building. Across town, Anaiah's encrypted phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. She almost deleted it reflexively. Paranoia had become her default setting, but something about the timing made her pause. "I know what you're going through. We need to talk." Linda. Her mother. Anaiah stared at the message for a long moment, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. 6 months of radio silence, and now this. She typed and deleted responses 3 times before settling on, "How did you get this number?" The response came immediately. "Alex helped me set up a secure account. I've been following the news about the company. I know you're involved." The admission hung in the digital space between them. Her mother knew. Had known, possibly from the beginning, and had chosen silence over confrontation. Classic Linda Chen, the master of willful blindness when family peace was at stake. "What do you want?" Anaiah typed. "To help." The 2 words hit like a physical blow. Help. From the woman who'd stood silently while Richard destroyed their family, who'd chosen marital loyalty over maternal love, who'd let her daughter walk out into the world with nothing but a laptop bag and a broken heart. But as Anaiah's anger flared, another message arrived. He's planning to blame external hackers. Chinese competitors, he thinks. He has no idea how personal this is. Intelligence. Linda was offering intelligence. Before Anaiah could respond, her monitoring systems chimed with an alert. Chen Electronics had just hired Blackstone Security, a private firm specializing in corporate espionage and digital warfare. Richard wasn't just defending anymore. He was preparing to hunt. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was Jordan. "Whatever you're doing, it's escalating fast. The tech community is buzzing about Chen Electronics' cyber attack. Are you sure you want this kind of attention?" The question cut deeper than intended. Anaiah looked around her apartment. The servers, the monitors, the evidence of her descent into obsession, and realized she wasn't sure about anything anymore. What had started as justice was becoming something darker, something that consumed everything in its path, including innocent people. Her latest attack had targeted the company's employee database, corrupting payroll systems, and benefits administration. The goal had been to make Richard's life difficult. The reality was that 300 Chen Electronics employees were now questioning whether their health insurance was still valid. People like Marcus Rivera. Anaiah pulled up his file from the human resources database she'd infiltrated. Single father, age 34, daughter Sophia, with a rare genetic condition requiring expensive treatments. His entire existence revolved around the job security and medical benefits that Chen Electronics provided, benefits that were now in jeopardy because of her war against Richard. The realization hit like ice water. She wasn't just destroying her father's empire, she was destroying lives. Real people with real families who had done nothing except work for the wrong company at the wrong time. Her secure phone buzzed with another message from Linda. Richard hired private investigators. They're looking into former employees with technical access. You need to be careful. Careful. As if careful mattered anymore. As if she hadn't already crossed every line that separated justice from vengeance, precision from destruction. Detective Sarah Kim had spent the last 3 days building a profile of the Chen Electronics attacker. The sophistication suggested inside knowledge, possibly from a current or former employee with administrative access. The personal nature of the timing, during the IPO announcement, pointed to someone with a grudge. Someone with intimate knowledge of Richard Chen's vulnerabilities and the skill to exploit them. The list of potential suspects was surprisingly short. Chen Electronics had always been a family business, run by people Richard trusted implicitly, which made the betrayal even more devastating and more revealing. Sarah pulled up personnel records, cross-referencing technical expertise with access levels and potential motives. One name kept rising to the surface, despite being marked as inactive in the system. A name that had been systematically scrubbed from patents and press releases 6 months ago. A ghost in the machine who was very much alive. And very, very angry. Back in her apartment, Anaiah stared at Marcus Rivera's file on her screen. His daughter smiled from an employee family photo, gap-toothed and innocent, holding a certificate from a recent science fair. The same science fair where Anaiah had once volunteered, back when she'd been the heir apparent instead of the enemy. For the first time since Richard's rejection, she felt something crack in the armor of her rage. The war she'd started was consuming more than just her father. It was consuming everything. Marcus Rivera's hands shook as he stared at the insurance denial letter. The words blurred together. Coverage under review. System maintenance. Temporary processing delays. Corporate doublespeak that meant his daughter's next treatment was in jeopardy. Papa? Sophia's voice drifted from the living room where she was building elaborate castles from medical supply boxes. At 8 years old, she'd turned her rare genetic condition into a game, transforming physical therapy equipment into imaginary kingdoms. Her optimism broke Marcus's heart daily. Everything's fine, Mija, he called back, folding the letter with deliberate care. Everything was decidedly not fine. Sophia's enzyme replacement therapy cost $12,000 per month, money that existed only because Chen Electronics provided premium health coverage for employees like him who'd worked their way up from the factory floor. Employees who were now watching their benefits disappear into digital quicksand. Across Seattle, Anaiah sat in her apartment at 4 a.m., Sophia Rivera's medical records glowing on her screen like an indictment. The 8-year-old's treatment schedule was mapped out in clinical detail. Weekly infusions, quarterly monitoring, a life sustained by expensive interventions that required absolute insurance stability. Stability that Anaiah had just destroyed. She'd been tracking the fallout from her benefits system attacks with scientific detachment until the human impact reports started filtering through her surveillance feeds. Marcus Rivera was one of 47 Chen Electronics employees facing insurance complications. His case was just the most heartbreaking. The most damning. Her secure phone buzzed. Alex's name appeared on the encrypted messaging app Jordan had helped him set up, the digital lifeline between siblings separated by their father's fury. I know it's you, Alex's message read. I don't know how, but I know. The patterns, the timing, this is personal in a way that only family could make it. Anaiah stared at the screen, her fingers frozen over the keyboard. Alex had always been perceptive, the peacemaker who noticed things others missed. Of course he'd figured it out. I don't know what you're talking about, she typed back. Sophia Rivera's treatments got delayed because of the insurance glitches. She missed her enzyme therapy yesterday. Marcus is panicking, and I don't blame him. The words hit like physical blows. Yesterday. While Anaiah had been celebrating another successful attack on Richard's infrastructure, a little girl had gone without medicine that kept her cells from literally eating themselves. Dad's hiring Blackstone Security, Alex continued. They're good, Anaiah. Really good. If you're doing what I think you're doing, they'll find you. Before she could respond, another message appeared. And if they find you, I'll lose my sister forever. Really forever this time. The rawness in his words made her chest tighten. Alex had been caught in the crossfire since the beginning, loving both sides of a war that couldn't end with reconciliation. She'd been so focused on hurting Richard that she'd forgotten her actions also hurt the brother who'd never done anything except try to keep their family together. Detective Sarah Kim spread the forensic analysis across her desk like tarot cards revealing an ugly future. The Chen Electronics attacks showed sophisticated planning, intimate system knowledge, and a progression that suggested personal vendetta rather than financial motivation. The attacker knew exactly which vulnerabilities to exploit, which systems would cause maximum disruption, which timing would create optimal humiliation. This wasn't random cybercrime. This was someone settling a score. Her partner, Detective Mike Reeves, dropped into the chair across from her. Blackstone Security called. They're taking point on the investigation, but they want our files. Private security firms don't usually request police assistance unless they're worried, Sarah observed, studying the attack timeline. What's got them nervous? The sophistication level. Whoever's doing this has administrator-level access to Chen Electronics' systems. That means either current employee or someone who left recently with their credentials intact. Sarah's pen tapped against her notepad. How recently? 6 months, maybe less. The attack started right after Chen Electronics announced their IPO timeline. 6 months. Sarah pulled up Chen Electronics' personnel records, filtering for departures in the relevant time frame. The list was surprisingly short. The company prided itself on employee retention, but one name had been completely redacted from the files, scrubbed so thoroughly that only administrative shadows remained. Someone important enough to erase, someone dangerous enough to hunt. Back in her apartment, Anaiah received another message from Linda. Richard's getting desperate. He's convinced Chinese competitors are behind the attacks. He's planning to go public with that theory tomorrow. The irony was acidic. Richard would rather blame foreign enemies than consider that his own actions had created a domestic one. He'd rather invent international conspiracies than face the possibility that his daughter was capable of this level of destruction. Her daughter. The phrase still felt foreign, even after 6 months of living as her authentic self. Another alert chimed from her monitoring systems. Chen Electronics had just announced layoffs, 50 employees in redundant departments, as the company tried to cut costs during the temporary security crisis. 50 families losing their livelihoods because of her war with Richard. Anaiah pulled up the layoff list, her stomach dropping as she recognized names. Jenny Martinez from accounting, who'd always remembered her birthday. Robert Kim from facilities, who'd fixed her office heating without being asked. People who'd been kind to the person she used to be, now paying the price for what she'd become. Her phone rang. Jordan's number. "You need to stop." No preamble, no greeting, just brutal honesty. "Jordan, whatever you're doing to Chen Electronics, it's not healing you. It's poisoning you." Jordan's voice carried the exhaustion of someone who'd watched their friend disappear into obsession. "I've been where you are, Anaiah. The anger, the need to make people pay for hurting you. It doesn't fix anything. It just makes you into someone you'll hate. He destroyed my life. So you're destroying other people's lives to even the score? How does that make you different from him?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Anaiah looked around her apartment. The servers humming their electronic mantras, the monitors casting their cold light, the evidence of her descent into something she didn't recognize. When had justice become vengeance? When had precision become destruction? When had she become the very thing she'd accused her father of being? Her secure phone buzzed with another message from Alex. "Sofia Rivera's in the hospital. Her condition destabilized when she missed her treatment. Marcus is sitting in a waiting room right now, wondering if his insurance will cover the emergency intervention." Anaiah's hands began to shake. A little girl was fighting for stability because of choices Anaiah had made in anger. The collateral damage had a name, a face, a father sitting helplessly in a hospital corridor. The daughter Richard had declared dead was killing innocent children. She stared at her keyboards, the weapons she'd used to wage war against her family, and realized she'd become something monstrous. The brilliant mind that had built Chen Electronics' future was now systematically destroying lives, including her own. For the first time since Richard's rejection, Anaiah began to understand the true cost of revenge. It wasn't just destroying her father, it was destroying her. Detective Sarah Kim's coffee had gone cold hours ago, but she barely noticed. Spread across her desk were 3 distinct investigative threads that were finally beginning to weave together into something resembling truth. The Chen Electronics cyber attacks weren't random acts of corporate espionage. They were a methodical dismantling by someone who knew exactly where to strike. Someone who'd been systematically erased from the company's official records. "The redacted employee files are the key," she told Detective Reeves, pointing to the gaps in Chen Electronics' personnel database. "Look at this timeline. 6 months ago, someone important enough to scrub completely left the company. The attacks started exactly 1 week after the IPO announcement." Reeves leaned over her shoulder, studying the forensic analysis. Blackstone Security found something interesting in the code signatures. The attack vectors show intimate knowledge of Chen Electronics' proprietary systems. Not just access, architectural understanding. Sarah's pen tapped against her notepad as pieces clicked into place. Someone who helped build those systems. Someone who would know every vulnerability because they designed the security protocols themselves. Her computer chimed with an encrypted message from her contact at the FBI's cybercrime division. Chen Electronics employee records show deletion of one individual 6 months ago. Legal name change filed in King County around the same time frame. Subject, Anaiah Williams, formerly listed as Richard Chen's heir apparent. There it was. The ghost in the machine had a name. Anaiah Williams, transgender daughter of Richard Chen. Erased from company history but very much alive and very much capable of sophisticated cyber warfare. Sarah immediately began cross-referencing financial records, residential addresses, digital footprints. What she found painted a picture of someone living off the grid. Cash transactions, encrypted communications, a Capitol Hill apartment leased under an alias. Someone who knew she was being hunted. Across town, Anaiah's surveillance systems screamed warnings across multiple monitors. Police databases were being queried with her legal name. Facial recognition searches were running through Seattle's traffic camera network. Bank records were being subpoenaed. The net was closing. She'd known this moment would come eventually. You couldn't wage digital war against a major corporation without leaving traces, no matter how careful you were. But the speed of their progress surprised her. Detective Kim was better than most cops at connecting dots in the digital realm. Her secure phone buzzed with a message from Jordan. Are you safe? There are unmarked cars on your street. Anaiah moved to her window, staying in the shadows as she peered through the blinds. 2 black sedans sat at opposite ends of the block, their occupants trying too hard to look casual. Blackstone security, probably. Private investigators with fewer legal constraints than police officers. They weren't moving in yet. They were watching, waiting, building their case before making an arrest that would stick. Another message, this time from Alex. Dad's acting strange, paranoid. He keeps talking about Chinese hackers, but I think he knows it's personal. I think he knows it's family. Of course, Richard suspected. Deep down, beneath his pride and prejudice, he had to recognize the surgical precision of these attacks. Only someone who truly understood Chen Electronics, someone who'd helped build its digital infrastructure, could cause this level of systematic destruction. Only his dead daughter could hate him this efficiently. Anaiah's hands moved automatically across her keyboards, initiating data destruction protocols she'd prepared for exactly this scenario. Hard drives began wiping themselves in careful sequence, leaving no recoverable traces of her activities. The apartment that had been her war room was becoming a digital crime scene, and she was methodically burning the evidence. But destruction took time, and time was a luxury she no longer possessed. Her phone rang, Linda's encrypted number. They're coming for you. Her mother's voice was tight with fear. Richard just got off the phone with Blackstone. They have enough evidence for an arrest warrant. How long do I have? Hours. Maybe less. Linda's voice cracked slightly. Anaiah, whatever you've done, however angry you are at your father, you need to run. Or surrender. But don't let them hunt you down like a criminal. The irony was bitter. Linda, who'd stood silently while Richard destroyed their family, was now trying to save the daughter she'd failed to protect. Why are you helping me? Anaiah asked. Because I should have helped you 6 months ago. Because I should have been your mother instead of his wife. Linda's admission carried years of suppressed guilt. Because watching you destroy yourself with revenge is destroying me too. Through her window, Anaiah saw more vehicles arriving. Not just surveillance now, tactical teams, body armor and communication equipment that suggested they were preparing for a raid. Her destruction protocols were only halfway complete. If they breached her apartment now, they'd find enough evidence to put her away for decades. But completing the data wipe meant abandoning her ultimate weapon, the final attack she'd been preparing for months. The one that would destroy Chen Electronics so completely that Richard would have nothing left except the memory of what his hatred had cost him. Jordan's voice echoed in her memory. How does that make you different from him? Anaiah stared at her screens. Financial destruction protocols, system termination sequences, the digital equivalent of nuclear weapons aimed at her father's empire. She could complete her revenge, ensure that Richard lost everything, just as she had. Or she could choose to be better than the man who'd raised her. Her phone buzzed with a final message from Alex. Sofia Rivera's stable. The doctors say she'll be okay. But Marcus is scared, Anaiah, really scared about what happens next. A little girl was fighting for her life because of choices Anaiah had made in anger. An innocent family was trapped in the crossfire of a war they didn't understand, facing financial ruin because of her need for vengeance. The surveillance cars were moving now. Radio chatter echoed from the street as tactical teams prepared to breach. Detective Kim was probably reviewing her warrant, preparing to arrest the daughter Richard Chen had declared dead. Anaiah's fingers hovered over the keyboard. Two choices: complete her revenge and destroy everything, or walk away and accept the consequences of what she'd already done. Outside, car doors slammed with the finality of justice approaching. Inside, Anaiah Williams faced the choice that would define whether she was her father's daughter or her own person. The brilliant mind that had built an empire's future was about to decide its fate. And her own. The encrypted message arrived as Anaiah watched tactical teams position themselves outside her apartment. Linda's words appeared on her secure phone like a lifeline thrown into churning waters. "There's something you need to know about your father. Something that changes everything." Anaiah's fingers paused over the keyboard where she'd been preparing to either complete her final attack or surrender to the approaching authorities. "I don't have time for family therapy, Mom." Chemtech Industries, 1997. Look it up. The name meant nothing to Anaiah, but something in Linda's urgency made her split her attention between the tactical teams below and a rapid database search. Chemtech Industries, a small Seattle startup that had developed revolutionary chemical processing technology in the mid-90s. "What does this have to do with anything?" she typed back. "Your father destroyed them, stole their patents, corrupted their data, drove them into bankruptcy. Then he hired their lead engineer and claimed the innovations as Chen Electronics' breakthrough into industrial applications." Anaiah's blood turned to ice water. The story was sickeningly familiar. A small company with brilliant technology, destroyed by someone with more resources and fewer scruples. The exact playbook she was using against Richard now. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I helped him do it." The confession hit like a physical blow. Linda Chen, the quiet wife who'd sacrificed her career for family stability, had been complicit in corporate theft. The same woman, who now played the innocent bystander in family conflicts, had actively participated in destroying another family's dreams. "I was working as a lawyer then," Linda's next message revealed. "Corporate law. I found the vulnerabilities in Chemtech's intellectual property protections. I helped Richard exploit them legally while he handled the other aspects, corporate espionage, digital sabotage. The systematic destruction of a competitor using insider knowledge and technological superiority." Anaiah realized she was staring at her own reflection in a mirror made of family history. Her phone rang. Linda's encrypted number. "I need you to understand." Her mother's voice was hollow with years of suppressed guilt. "We told ourselves it was business, necessary for the company's growth. Chemtech was failing anyway. We were just accelerating the inevitable." "You destroyed them," Anaiah said, her voice flat with recognition. "We destroyed them," Linda corrected. "And then we hired David Martinez, their lead engineer, and made him sign NDAs that prevented him from ever revealing what we'd taken. His wife was pregnant. They needed the money. The parallels were devastating. Anaiah was using the exact same methods her father had perfected decades earlier: intimate knowledge, technological superiority, and the methodical destruction of a target's digital infrastructure. She'd become everything she hated about Richard Chen. "Why tell me this now?" Anaiah asked. "Because watching you destroy yourself with revenge is like watching myself 25 years ago. Because I know what it feels like to become someone you don't recognize in the name of justice." Linda's voice cracked. "Because David Martinez killed himself 6 months after we hired him. The guilt of watching his life's work get stolen and knowing he couldn't fight back. It broke him." The words hit like hammer blows. Another family destroyed by Chen greed. Another brilliant mind crushed by corporate warfare. another innocent casualty in Richard's relentless pursuit of success. His daughter was Sophia's age, Linda continued. 8 years old when she found her father in the garage. Anaiah's breath caught. The cycle of destruction had been spinning for decades, claiming victims across generations. And now she was perpetuating it, threatening to destroy Sofia Rivera's father, just as her parents had destroyed Sofia Martinez's. Outside her window, Detective Kim was coordinating with the tactical teams. Radio chatter filled the air as they prepared to breach her apartment. But Anaiah was no longer thinking about escape or final attacks. She was thinking about David Martinez's daughter, growing up without a father because of Richard's ambitions. She was thinking about Sofia Rivera, waiting in a hospital room while her father wondered if his insurance would cover her treatments. She was thinking about the cycle of harm that turned victims into perpetrators, generation after generation. Alex found the Chemtech files, Linda's voice continued. He's been researching our family history, trying to understand why everything fell apart. He knows what your father and I did back then. What does Alex want? To break the cycle. To stop the pattern before it destroys what's left of our family. Linda paused. He's the one who convinced me to tell you the truth. Anaiah's secure phone buzzed with a message from Alex. I know about Chemtech. I know about David Martinez. I know Dad's done exactly what you're doing now. But Anaiah, you get to choose differently. The tactical teams were moving into position. Anaiah could hear boots on the stairs outside her apartment. Detective Kim was probably reviewing her warrant one final time, preparing to arrest the daughter who'd been systematically erased from existence. But the arrest no longer mattered. What mattered was the choice between perpetuating her father's legacy of destruction or breaking free from it. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard where her final attack waited, lines of code that would destroy Chen Electronics completely, leaving Richard with nothing but the memory of what his hatred had cost. Just like David Martinez, who'd lost everything and seen no way forward except death, Anaiah closed her eyes and saw Sofia Rivera's gap-toothed smile from the employee family photo. Saw Marcus Rivera sitting in a hospital waiting room, terrified for his daughter's future. Saw the innocent casualties of a war that had been raging since before she was born. Her phone buzzed with a final message from Linda. I can't undo what your father and I did to Chemtech. I can't bring David Martinez back. But you can choose to be better than we were. You can choose to stop the cycle. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed in the hallway outside. Anaiah Williams, brilliant architect of Chen Electronics' future and engineer of its destruction, faced the moment that would define whether she inherited her father's legacy of harm or forged her own path towards something resembling justice. The daughter Richard had declared dead was about to decide whether to kill his empire or save her own soul. Outside, Detective Kim raised her hand, preparing to give the signal for the tactical team to breach. Inside, Anaiah's finger moved toward the keyboard, carrying the weight of 3 generations of choices and the hope of breaking a cycle that had already claimed too many lives. The Chen family legacy was about to be written by the daughter who was supposed to be dead, and only she could decide what story it would tell. Anaiah's finger hovered one keystroke away from digital apocalypse. The final attack protocol glowed on her monitor, elegant lines of code that would erase Chen Electronics from existence as completely as Richard had erased her. Every system, every backup, every redundancy would cascade into failure, leaving nothing but smoking ruins where her father's empire once stood. The sound of tactical boots echoed in the hallway outside. Detective Kim's voice carried through the thin walls. Anaiah Williams, Seattle Police. We have a warrant for your arrest. She had seconds to decide. Complete the destruction and face the consequences, or walk away from everything she'd worked toward for 6 months of sleepless nights and consuming rage. Her secure phone buzzed with one final message from Alex. He's here. Dad's here. In the lobby with his lawyers, demanding to be part of the arrest. He still doesn't understand what he's lost. Of course, Richard was here. He couldn't resist being present for the capture of the daughter who dared to challenge his authority. The man who'd built an empire through ruthless ambition would want to witness the final defeat of his greatest threat, his dead daughter. Anaiah closed her eyes and made her choice. Instead of executing the final attack, her fingers moved to a different program, one she'd written weeks ago but never intended to use. A confession protocol that would upload everything: the attacks she'd orchestrated, the methods she'd used, the vulnerabilities she'd exploited, and most importantly, the proof of Richard's own crimes dating back to Chemtech Industries. If she was going down, she wouldn't go down alone. But as her finger moved toward the enter key, something stopped her. Not fear of consequences or hope for mercy, but the memory of David Martinez's 8-year-old daughter finding her father dead in the garage. The memory of Sofia Rivera's gap-toothed smile in a hospital bed. The realization that destroying Richard completely wouldn't heal the wounds he'd inflicted. It would just create new ones for innocent people to carry. SPDC. Open the door! Anaiah stood slowly, her hands moving away from the keyboard for the first time in months. The monitors around her displayed the digital weapons she'd spent half a year creating, elegant tools of destruction that could end her father's empire with a single command. She powered them all down. The apartment door splintered under the tactical team's breach. Black-clad figures poured through the opening, weapons drawn, shouting commands that blended into white noise. Anaiah raised her hands and stepped away from her workstation, watching as they secured the space that had been her war room, her prison, her descent into everything she'd sworn never to become. Detective Sarah Kim entered behind the tactical team, her expression professional but not unkind. She'd seen enough cybercrime suspects to recognize the difference between criminal defiance and exhausted surrender. Anaiah Williams, you're under arrest for computer fraud, conspiracy to commit cybercrime, and corporate espionage. Kim recited the charges with practiced efficiency. You have the right to remain silent. The words washed over Anaiah like a tide she'd been expecting for months. As the handcuffs clicked into place, she felt something she hadn't experienced since walking out of Richard's office 6 months ago. Relief. The war was over. She'd chosen to end it. In the lobby of her apartment building, Richard Chen waited with 2 lawyers and a fury that could have powered the city. He'd spent decades building Chen Electronics from nothing, and watching his dead daughter systematically dismantle his life's work had pushed him beyond rational thought. Where is she? He demanded, as Detective Kim escorted Anaiah through the lobby. Where's the terrorist who tried to destroy my company? The word terrorist hit the air like a slap. Anaiah met her father's eyes for the first time since he'd declared her dead, and what she saw there was everything she'd expected: rage, betrayal, vindication that his rejection had been justified. What she didn't see was recognition. Richard was looking at a criminal, not his daughter. A threat to be eliminated. Not a person he'd helped create and then systematically destroyed. Mr. Chen, Detective Kim's voice carried professional warning, I need you to step back. That person, Richard pointed at Anaiah with shaking fury, nearly bankrupted my company, destroyed employee livelihoods, threatened national security with sophisticated cyber attacks. That person, Anaiah said quietly, is your daughter. The words stopped Richard cold. For 6 months, he'd managed to separate the brilliant child he'd once loved from the enemy who'd been attacking his company. Now, seeing Anaiah in handcuffs, he was forced to confront the reality that they were the same person. The daughter he'd declared dead was very much alive, and she'd learned to be exactly like him. You have no daughter, Richard said finally, his voice hollow with the weight of maintaining a lie that had cost them both everything. My son died 6 months ago. Your son was never real, Anaiah replied, but your daughter, the one who built the technology you're getting rich from, she's very real, and she's standing right in front of you. Alex appeared in the lobby doorway, having rushed from Chen Electronics when he learned about the arrest. His face was pale with the strain of watching his family destroy itself in real time. Dad, stop, Alex said, moving between his father and sister. Just stop. Haven't we lost enough? Richard looked at his remaining child, his good son, his reliable heir, and for a moment, his composure cracked. The cost of his rigid principles was finally becoming visible. One daughter in handcuffs, one son begging for sanity, and a company that would never recover from the wounds both sides had inflicted. "She tried to destroy everything," Richard said, but his voice lacked its earlier fury. "You destroyed her first," Alex replied with quiet conviction. "You threw her away like she was nothing, and then acted surprised when she fought back." Detective Kim cleared her throat. "Mr. Chen, we need to process the suspect. You can continue this conversation through proper legal channels." As they led Anaiah toward the police car, she looked back at her father one last time. Richard stood in the lobby surrounded by lawyers and broken family, finally facing the consequences of choices he'd made in pride and fear. "Dad," Anaiah called out, her voice carrying across the space between them. "The confession files are on my desk. Everything I did. Everything you did to Chemtech. Everything that led us here. Alex knows the password." Richard's face went white as the implication hit him. His dead daughter had documented everything, not just her own crimes, but his as well. The perfect revenge, delivered not through destruction but through truth. As the police car pulled away, Anaiah watched her father's empire fade into the Seattle rain. She'd chosen mercy over vengeance, confession over destruction, accountability over revenge. But she'd also ensured that if she was going down for her crimes, Richard Chen would face his own. The daughter he'd declared dead was about to teach him the true meaning of consequences. And the cycle of destruction that had claimed David Martinez 25 years ago was finally going to be broken, not through more violence, but through the radical act of choosing truth over power. The war was over. Now the real work of healing could begin. The King County Jail interview room smelled like industrial disinfectant and broken dreams. Anaiah sat across from her court-appointed attorney, James Morrison, reviewing the charges that could put her away for 15 years. But her attention kept drifting to the visitor request form that had arrived that morning, a name she never expected to see again. Grandmother May Chen wanted to visit. The 89-year-old matriarch had maintained strategic silence throughout the family's 6-month war, observing from her assisted living facility, while her son and granddaughter destroyed each other. May spoke little English in public settings, preferring to let others assume she didn't understand the complexities of American business and family dynamics. They had no idea how much she actually comprehended. "Mrs. Chen is here," the guard announced, opening the door to admit a small, elderly woman who moved with surprising dignity despite her walker. May's eyes, sharp as obsidian even at her age, took in every detail of the sterile room before settling on Anaiah's face. They studied each other in silence. Anaiah saw traces of her father in May's strong jawline, but also something softer. A patience that Richard had never possessed, a wisdom earned through surviving history's darker chapters. "Grandmother," Anaiah said in Mandarin, the language of her childhood before Richard had insisted on English only in their home. "Child of my heart," May replied in the same language, her voice carrying decades of unspoken affection. "You look tired." "I've been busy." May's laugh was dry as autumn leaves. "Destroying your father's empire requires dedication, I imagine." The casual acknowledgement of her actions hit Anaiah like a physical blow. "You know?" "I know many things. I know Richard cast you out for being true to yourself. I know you have been using the intelligence I helped nurture to wage war against your own family. I know that this path leads only to darkness." May settled into her chair with practiced efficiency, her gnarled hands folding over her walker's handle. "But mostly, I know that you are repeating mistakes that have already claimed too many lives. Grandmother, in China, during the Cultural Revolution, I watched families destroy themselves in the name of ideological purity," May continued, her voice carrying the weight of witnessed history. "Parents denounced children. Children betrayed parents. Everyone claimed righteousness while participating in their own destruction." Anaiah felt something cold settle in her stomach. This isn't the same thing, isn't it? A parent rejecting a child for failing to meet rigid expectations? A child using intimate knowledge to systematically destroy the parent's life work? Tell me, precious one, how is this different? The question hung in the air between them like a challenge. Anaiah had spent months justifying her actions as necessary justice, but hearing them reflected through her grandmother's experience made them sound like something else entirely, like a pattern that had been repeating for generations. Your father is a proud man, May said, switching to English with careful precision. Proud and frightened. He came to America with nothing, built empire from emptiness. When you revealed your true self, he saw threat to everything he had created. I wasn't a threat. I was his daughter asking for acceptance. To proud man, difference is invisible. May's eyes softened slightly. Richard has never learned to separate love from control. He believes protecting family name protects family. He cannot see that name without family is just sound and empty air. The truth in those words cut deeper than any accusation. Richard's entire identity was built around the Chen legacy, the immigrant success story, the family business, the continuation of tradition through future generations. Anaiah's transition hadn't just challenged his beliefs, it had threatened the narrative that gave his life meaning. But you, May continued, her voice growing stern, you have used your pain to create more pain. You have become the very thing you accused him of being, someone who destroys family in name of being right. He destroyed us first, and now you finished the destruction he began. May leaned forward slightly, her eyes reflecting decades of survival through impossible circumstances. In China, I watched brilliant children become monsters because they could not forgive their parents' failures. I watched parents die alone because their children chose righteousness over mercy. The words hit like hammer blows. Anaiah had been so focused on justice that she'd never considered the possibility that her grandmother, the woman who'd survived the Cultural Revolution, might see her actions as part of a familiar and destructive pattern. What would you have me do? Anaiah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Choose to be larger than your pain. May's voice carried absolute conviction. Choose to break cycle instead of continuing it. Choose to save what remains of our family instead of finishing its destruction. He said I was dead to him, and you have spent 6 months proving him right. May's response was gentle but merciless. You became ghost that haunts family, specter of vengeance that turns love into fear. Is that who you wish to be? Before Anaiah could respond, the interview room door opened. Richard Chen stood in the doorway, his face a mask of controlled fury. Behind him, Alex hovered uncertainly, clearly having orchestrated this unexpected family reunion. What is she doing here? Richard demanded, his eyes moving between his mother and his daughter without really seeing either. Cleaning up mess you created, May replied in English, her voice carrying authority that made Richard pause despite his anger. Trying to save family you are determined to destroy. She destroyed my company. She nearly bankrupted. She fought back against son who chose shame over love, May interrupted, rising slowly from her chair with dignified fury. You created enemy from daughter who wanted only acceptance. You turned love into war because your pride was more important than your child. The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Richard's composure cracked visibly as his mother, the woman whose approval he'd spent his entire life seeking, faced him with the consequences of his choices. She betrayed everything we built, Richard said, but his voice lacked its usual conviction. You betrayed her first, May replied, with brutal honesty. Child asked for love. You gave her exile. Child asked for family. You gave her death sentence. Her voice grew quieter, more dangerous. Tell me, Richard, what did you expect her to do with such gifts? Alex stepped forward, his voice shaking with the weight of watching his family implode. Grandmother's right, Dad. We did this to ourselves. All of us. Alex? No. Alex's voice carried a strength Anaiah had never heard before. I'm done watching this family eat itself alive. Anaiah made mistakes. But so did you. So did Mom. So did I by staying silent while everything fell apart. May moved toward the door with measured steps, her walker tapping against the institutional floor. At the threshold, she turned back to face her fractured family. In China, I learned that survival requires choosing life over righteousness, healing over revenge, future over past. Her eyes moved between Richard and Anaiah with equal intensity. Choose wisely. Some chances for redemption come only once. She paused at Richard's side, her small hand touching his arm with surprising gentleness. Your daughter is not dead, Richard. But your family will be if you cannot learn difference between protecting what you built and destroying what you love. After May left, the interview room felt like a vacuum. Father and daughter faced each other across a table scarred with years of institutional use, while Alex stood between them like a bridge neither knew how to cross. For the first time in 6 months, they saw each other clearly, not as hero and villain, not as righteous and guilty, but as two people who had loved each other once and forgotten how to do so without conditions. The question now was whether they could remember before it was too late, whether the cycle May had witnessed in China would claim another generation, or whether love could finally prove stronger than pride. The federal courthouse in downtown Seattle buzzed with the kind of energy that surrounded high-profile corporate cases. Media crews lined the steps, financial reporters clutched their notebooks, and legal observers filled the gallery to witness what had become known as the Chen Electronics scandal, a story of family betrayal, corporate espionage, and the collision between traditional values and modern identity. But inside courtroom 7, the circus atmosphere faded into something more fundamental. A family facing the consequences of their choices. Anaiah sat at the defendant's table in a gray suit that made her look younger than her 28 years. 6 months in county jail had stripped away the hardened edges of her revenge campaign, leaving behind someone who looked more like the daughter Richard remembered than the enemy he'd been fighting. At the prosecution table, Assistant U.S. Attorney Jennifer Walsh reviewed her notes one final time. The case against Anaiah Williams was ironclad: computer fraud, corporate espionage, conspiracy charges that could result in 15 years in federal prison. But something about the confession files Alex had delivered 3 days ago had changed the entire trajectory of the proceedings. Files that documented not just Anaiah's cyber attacks, but Richard Chen's systematic destruction of Chemtech Industries 25 years earlier. Judge Patricia Santos called the court to order, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd seen every variation of human failure cross her bench. We're here for sentencing in the matter of United States versus Anaiah Williams, but I understand there's been a significant development? Richard Chen stood slowly from the gallery, his movement drawing every eye in the courtroom. For 3 days, he'd wrestled with the decision that would define not just his fate, but his family's future. The confession files had given him a choice: let his daughter face the full consequences of her actions while hiding his own crimes, or step forward and share the accountability. His legal team had been unanimous: stay silent, let Anaiah take the fall, protect the company and his legacy. But May's words echoed in his memory: choose to be larger than your pain. Your Honor, Richard's voice carried across the courtroom with the same authority he'd once used to command boardrooms. I need to make a statement. Judge Santos raised an eyebrow. Mr. Chen, you're not a party to these proceedings. I should be. Richard moved toward the front of the courtroom, each step feeling like walking through quicksand. I need to confess to crimes that are directly related to my daughter's actions. The courtroom erupted in whispers and shuffling papers. Anaiah turned to stare at her father, her expression shifting from confusion to something approaching shock. Dad, what are you doing? Alex whispered from the gallery, but Richard was already approaching the witness stand. 25 years ago, Richard began after being sworn in, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was about to reveal. I orchestrated the systematic destruction of a competitor called Chemtech Industries. I used corporate espionage, digital sabotage, and theft of intellectual property to bankrupt their company and steal their innovations. The confession landed like a bomb in the silent courtroom. Financial reporters scribbled frantically, while cameras captured every word of Richard Chen's professional suicide. My wife Linda assisted by finding legal vulnerabilities in their intellectual property protections. We convinced ourselves it was necessary business practice, competitive advantage in a brutal market. Richard's voice began to crack slightly. But we were wrong. We destroyed a family's dreams and drove their lead engineer, David Martinez, to suicide. Anaiah felt tears she hadn't shed in months beginning to blur her vision. Her father, the man who'd built his identity on moral superiority and traditional values, was publicly destroying himself to share her accountability. My daughter's actions against Chen Electronics were wrong, Richard continued, his eyes finally meeting Anaiah's across the courtroom. But they were also a direct response to my own methods. I taught her that systematic destruction was acceptable when justified by righteous anger. She simply applied my lessons to me. Judge Santos leaned forward, her expression grave. Mr. Chen, you understand that this confession opens you to federal prosecution? I understand. And I accept responsibility for my actions, just as I ask this court to consider the patterns that led to my daughter's choices. Richard's voice grew stronger. Anaiah Williams is brilliant, capable, and wounded by my failures as a father. She doesn't deserve to carry the full weight of a cycle I began decades before she was born. Assistant U.S. Attorney Walsh stood slowly, clearly recalculating her entire approach. Your Honor, in light of this new information, the government requests a recess to review the broader implications of these admissions. But before Judge Santos could respond, Anaiah stood at her table. Your Honor, I don't want to reduce sentence because of my father's confession. Her voice carried the clarity of someone who'd finally found solid ground. I want to take responsibility for my own choices. The courtroom fell silent as daughter faced father across the space that had separated them for 6 months. I attacked Chen Electronics because I was angry, hurt, and wanted revenge, Anaiah continued. I justified my actions by pointing to my father's rejection, but the truth is simpler. I chose to hurt people because I was hurting. That's not justice. It's just pain creating more pain. Richard's composure finally cracked completely. Watching his daughter accept accountability while refusing to hide behind his failures broke something in his chest that had been calcified for months. Anaiah, he said, his voice barely carrying across the courtroom. Dad. She turned to face him fully, and for the first time since the disownment, they saw each other clearly. I forgive you for rejecting me, and I'm sorry for trying to destroy everything you built. I'm sorry for declaring you dead when you asked me to see you alive. The apologies hung in the air between them. Not redemption, not instant healing, but the beginning of something that might someday become forgiveness. Judge Santos cleared her throat, bringing the proceeding back to order. Given these developments, I'm ordering a full investigation into the Chemtech matter and postponing sentencing pending those findings. However, I want both defendants to understand that accountability means facing consequences, not just expressing remorse. 3 months later, Richard Chen sat in his own federal courtroom, accepting a plea deal that would cost him 5 years in minimum security prison and forfeiture of personal assets totaling $40 million. Chen Electronics would survive under Alex's leadership, but the patriarch who'd built it would lose everything, except the possibility of rebuilding his relationship with his daughter. Anaiah accepted 18 months in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release and community service focused on cybersecurity education. Her technical expertise would be redirected toward protecting other companies from the kinds of attacks she'd perfected. The day of her sentencing, Mei Chen sat in the front row of the gallery, her walker beside her and her eyes bright with something approaching pride. As Anaiah was led away in handcuffs, their eyes met across the courtroom. Choose to be larger than your pain, Mei had said. For the first time in her life, Anaiah felt like she was finally learning how. Marcus Rivera kept his job at Chen Electronics under Alex's more compassionate leadership. Sophia's treatments resumed without interruption. The little girl who'd become an unwitting casualty of a family war grew up healthy, never knowing how close she'd come to losing her father to the same cycle that had claimed David Martinez's daughter years before. Some cycles could be broken. Some families could be saved, not through revenge or rigid righteousness, but through the radical choice to value love over pride, healing over harm, and the future over the past. The Chen family legacy would continue, not as a monument to traditional values or corporate success, but as proof that even the deepest wounds could heal when people chose accountability over blame. Richard and Anaiah would serve their sentences, pay their debts, and begin the long work of rebuilding trust. They would learn to be family again. Not the perfect family Richard had demanded or the vengeful dynamic Anaiah had created, but something messier and more honest. Something real. The daughter he'd declared dead was very much alive, and she was finally free to choose who she wanted to become. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.